May 15th, 1941, a summer's evening in Lisbon. The Portuguese capital trembles with espionage. A young Englishman sits in a café near the Tagus River, nursing a glass of Madeira he does not intend to finish. His name is Johnny Jowitt, though that is not the name that matters today. What matters is the man watching him from across the street, a German intelligence officer, desperate and calculating. The officer believes Jowitt to be a traitor, a disaffected RAF officer willing to sell secrets for money and passage to a safer shore. He is about to make the most consequential recruitment of his career. He doesn't know it yet, but he is also about to hand his entire intelligence apparatus over to the British, not through capture or coercion, but through an intricate dance of deception that will unfold across 4 years of total war. Within days, Jowitt will send his first radio message to Berlin using a German code that British cryptographers have already broken. Every word he sends will be approved by British intelligence. Every intelligence report he files will be a mixture of truth and carefully constructed lies. Every agent he claims to control will be a phantom, a ghost conjured from thin air and imagination. By the summer of 1945, when the war in Europe ends, the German High Command will believe they possess detailed knowledge of British military dispositions, troop movements, and strategic intentions. They will have access to what they believe are dozens of reliable agents scattered across Britain, reporting on factories and airfields and naval movements. None of these agents will have existed. All of them will have been inventions of a small group of British intelligence officers working from a nondescript office in London. This is the story of how Britain turned German intelligence inside out, and in doing so created one of the most audacious deception operations in the history of warfare. By 1940, Germany's espionage network in Britain was in catastrophic disarray, though Berlin did not yet realize it. What had begun as an ambitious plan to establish dozens of sleeper agents across the country had collapsed with startling speed. The German intelligence service, the Abwehr, had built its network on unreliable informants, marginal characters, and individuals with little genuine access to strategic information. Some agents turned out to be double agents already. Others were simply incompetent. As the Battle of Britain raged in the skies above Kent and Sussex, German intelligence was producing wildly inaccurate assessments of British aircraft production, exaggerating RAF losses and misunderstanding the capabilities of the Spitfire and Hurricane. By the autumn of 1940, German decision-makers in Berlin were making strategic judgments based on intelligence that was not merely incomplete but actively misleading. The Abwehr knew that its network had problems, but it did not know the true extent of the catastrophe. In truth, British counterintelligence, a division known as the Security Service, and popularly called MI5, had been methodically identifying and capturing German agents as they arrived. Some were caught immediately upon landing by parachute. Others were detected through the interception and decryption of German radio traffic. The British faced a choice at this moment. They could execute these agents, which would certainly prevent them from passing any information to Berlin. Alternatively, they could attempt something far more ambitious. They could turn them. They could offer these captured German spies a bargain: work for Britain, help us deceive your own employers, and you will live to see the end of the war. It was an extraordinarily risky proposition. Turning a single agent required meticulous planning, constant supervision, and absolute confidence that the agent would not betray the operation at some crucial moment. But for those in British intelligence with the imagination to see the possibility, it offered something unprecedented: the chance to completely invert the German intelligence system, to fill it with lies while simultaneously controlling what lies it received. The challenge was immense. German intelligence would need to be fed information that was credible enough to preserve the network's value, yet misleading enough to shape German strategy in ways favorable to Britain. Every agent would need to be managed with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. One false note, one agent who broke under pressure or developed doubts could bring the entire structure crashing down. The instrument through which this deception would be executed was formally known as the 20 Committee, though later historians would come to call it the double-cross system. The name reflected its nature. Each turned German agent would be a double agent, appearing to serve Germany whilst actually serving Britain. The committee was chaired by John Masterman, a Don from Oxford whose background was in classics and cricket, not intelligence. Yet Masterman proved to have precisely the qualities needed: a tolerance for ambiguity, a taste for intellectual elegance, and the bureaucratic skill to navigate between the demands of military commanders and the constraints of security. His committee met regularly throughout the war, reviewing each agent, discussing what information each should transmit, and ensuring that the whole operation remained coordinated and coherent. The work itself was done by a team of case officers, men who spent their days maintaining relationships with the captured German spies, developing the fictional identities that these agents would assume, and crafting the reports that they would send back to Berlin. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the system was not the deception itself, but the sheer volume of false information that had to be maintained. A German spy could not simply transmit military gossip. He needed to develop a network of sub-agents, each with their own history and access to different information. He needed to explain where his information came from and why he had access to it. He needed to live a life in Britain that was consistent with the cover story he had been given. Some agents were given fictional military positions. Others were equipped with false employment documents and placed in factories or docks. The case officers would brief them on current events so they could talk credibly about what they had supposedly witnessed. They would provide them with money that was ostensibly income from their intelligence work. They would organize meetings in safe houses where they could receive instructions and pass on their accumulated intelligence. The technical capacity to run this system depended upon one crucial fact: the British had broken the German codes. German agents communicated with Berlin through wireless sets, transmitting in the Enigma cipher. British cryptographers working at Bletchley Park and elsewhere could read these messages. This meant that when a German intelligence officer sent instructions to an agent in Britain, the British knew what those instructions were. When the agent replied with a report, the British intercepted both message and reply. If an agent went off message, if he transmitted something he shouldn't, the British would know immediately. The Germans, confident in their cipher, never realized they were communicating with the enemy every time they opened a channel to their supposed agents. The system required constant vigilance. Each agent had to be monitored to ensure they weren't getting into contact with other German agents or attempting to send unauthorized messages. Several times during the war, genuine German agents, men who hadn't been turned, were detected and arrested, preventing them from discovering the extent of the deception. On at least one occasion, a turned agent began to show signs of unreliability and had to be carefully removed from the network by his handlers, who invented a plausible reason for his withdrawal from intelligence work. The operation was overseen not just by MI5, but by the wider military intelligence community. Senior commanders had to be briefed on what information was being passed to Germany, because it was crucial that no genuine information contradicting the deception accidentally leak.
If you are finding this fascinating, a subscription would genuinely help us bring more stories like this to the channel. These documentaries take considerable time to research and produce. One of the most significant operations for which the double-cross system was used was the preparation for D-Day in 1944. British commanders knew that the success of the Normandy landings depended partly on persuading the Germans that the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. German commanders, if they believed the invasion would strike elsewhere, would position their reserves accordingly, leaving the actual invasion beaches less heavily defended. The double-cross agents became instruments of this grand deception. Garbo transmitted warning messages about supposed invasion preparations in Kent and East Anglia. The agents reported on the movements of fictitious American armies stationed in East Anglia, commanded by a general who existed only in German intelligence files. These false reports were not mere fantasies, but were carefully crafted to contain just enough verifiable detail to seem credible. They mentioned real locations, real units that actually existed, and real commanders, but arranged them in ways that created a misleading strategic picture. The Germans, reading these reports from agents they believed to be reliable, became progressively more convinced that the main blow would fall at Pas-de-Calais. When the invasion finally came at Normandy, German reserves remained positioned in the north, waiting for an invasion that would never arrive. This alone probably saved thousands of Allied lives, made the Normandy beachhead more defensible, and hastened the liberation of Europe. The agents also played a role in reporting on German V-weapon attacks. After the V-1 flying bombs began striking London in June 1944, the double-cross agents provided reports that allowed the Germans to believe their weapons were causing greater damage than they actually were, leading them to adjust their targeting in ways that were less effective than they might otherwise have been. The German approach to intelligence was, in many respects, fundamentally different from the British method. The Abwehr operated with greater respect for the abilities and reliability of individual agents, often engaging in what British intelligence considered reckless trust. German commanders sometimes acted on intelligence with surprising speed without sufficient verification. This meant they were vulnerable to deception. The Americans, by contrast, had no equivalent system to the double-cross operation. American intelligence agencies were relatively young organizations, not yet possessing the institutional knowledge or the tight integration with the signals intelligence that the British enjoyed. During the war, Americans relied much more heavily on human intelligence gathering and had fewer assets in place for the counterintelligence work. When the war ended, the Americans would adopt many of the lessons the British had learned, but during the conflict itself, the British were unique in their ability to run such a comprehensive and coordinated deception operation. The German intelligence service, meanwhile, created no equivalent system for turning British agents. There were German agents in Britain, and some were caught, but the Germans never developed the systematic, coordinated approach to deception that the British pioneered. This represented not so much a failure of imagination as a reflection of the different circumstances each nation faced. The British, operating from their own territory and with signals intelligence superiority, had the advantage. The Germans, fighting across far greater distances and without similar cryptographic advantage, could not create the same closed system of control. The impact of the double-cross system on the outcome of the Second World War cannot be measured in simple terms. It did not win the war by itself. Britain's ultimate victory depended on industrial capacity, military strength, strategic alliances, and the sheer determination of the population. Yet the operation shaped that victory in significant ways. By controlling what Germany believed about British military capabilities and dispositions, British intelligence officers influenced where the Germans positioned their forces and what strategies they pursued. During critical moments, the Battle of Britain, the preparations for D-Day, the defense against the flying bombs, the double-cross agents provided intelligence that made German decision-making less effective than it might otherwise have been. The psychological impact was also considerable. The German intelligence community, never suspecting the extent of the penetration, continued to have confidence in its network throughout the war. This confidence led them to discount genuine intelligence from other sources that contradicted what their agents were reporting. German commanders developed an increasingly distorted picture of British strength and intentions. When the war ended, some German officers were astonished to learn that the intelligence they had been receiving had been controlled by the British. The legacy of the double-cross system extended far beyond the Second World War. The operational techniques developed during the conflict, the careful cultivation of turned agents, the integration of signals intelligence with human intelligence, the strategic use of deception in warfare, became cornerstones of post-war intelligence practice. British intelligence agencies continued to use many of these methods during the Cold War and beyond. The Americans, learning from British methods, developed their own sophisticated deception operations. The system also demonstrated something fundamental about intelligence work, that controlling your enemy's information can sometimes matter as much as gathering information about them. In a world of imperfect knowledge, where commanders make decisions based on what they believe rather than what is true, the ability to shape that belief becomes a form of power unto itself. Return for a moment to that summer's evening in Lisbon. Johnny Jowitt, if that was ever truly his name, disappeared into the machinery of British intelligence, became a transmitter of falsehoods, an inventor of phantom soldiers and imaginary armies. He was not the only one. Across 4 years of war, dozens of German agents were turned. Some survived the war and rebuilt their lives in obscurity. Others did not. But collectively, they executed one of the most extraordinary deceptions in military history. They were men who appeared to spy for Germany whilst actually spying for Britain. They reported on armies that did not exist, from positions they did not hold, to commanders who trusted them absolutely whilst knowing nothing of the truth. The German intelligence apparatus, which ought to have been the eyes and ears of the Wehrmacht, instead became a vast instrument for receiving carefully controlled falsehoods. The High Command received reports from agents they believed to be reliable, consulted maps showing enemy dispositions that existed only in the minds of British intelligence officers, and made strategic decisions based on a fundamentally distorted picture of reality. This was not victory achieved through brute force or superior strategy. Though Britain possessed these things, this was victory achieved through the subtle manipulation of belief, through the patient crafting of false information, so meticulous and so credible that the enemy did not merely believe it, the enemy trusted it implicitly. In the end, perhaps that is the most devastating intelligence operation of all, to make your enemy depend upon lies so completely that the truth becomes unrecognizable, and he walks into defeat still convinced of the reliability of his information.